Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for being here. It's so great to see all the panelists, all the participants, and also all the attendees. My name is Yohei. I use he, him as my pronouns, and I'm part of the Community-Based Research Center, and I would like to talk about this organization just a little bit. Community-Based Research Center, CBRC, promotes the health of 2S LGBTQIA+ community through research and intervention development. And Pivot is a community health leadership program for 2S LGBTQIA+ people interested in becoming community health advocates. Throughout Pivot, participants gain the health literacy, practical skills, and the community networks needed to identify and collectively respond to the systematic and structural challenges impacting their health and that of their peers. And this session is the result of this Pivot program, and this is the intervention piece we developed. And before going into the actual session, I would like to acknowledge those who have been with us for entire this time. We started our first session in January, so it has been 7-8 months, and I really appreciate those volunteers who have been with us for entire this time. So if though I will call out, and if you can turn on your camera for 1 second and maybe wave, that'd be great. Here we have Rachel. Hi, Rachel. And we have Jill. I think Jill's camera is not on now. A is here as well. Hi, A. A, and we have hi, and we have Ask, and Ask is connecting to this session through the phone. So unfortunately, we can't see his face, but Ask will be also part of the CBRC after this, or he is already the part of the CBRC. Yeah. Okay. And now I would like
to. Folks.
Oh, hi, Jill. This is there. Great. Thank you. And I would like to pass it on to Charlie so that Charlie can talk about a little bit more and quadrangle.
Thanks, Yohei. So my name is Trolley Murphy. I go by he, him, or they, them pronouns. Like Yohei, I'm part of CBRC, which is the Community-Based Research Center. And I'm also the Executive Director of Quadrangle NL. And the mission for Quad, who is the partner with CBRC on the Pivot projects here in Newfoundland and Labrador, is all about creating connection through it. And with Quad, we're trying to build a community center here for the 2S LGBTQI+ individuals and organizations to come together and unify and really start working more together as a network to really help transfer a lot of knowledge between Labrador, Newfoundland, and all of our other kind of like organizations that are currently working and doing this much needed work. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Denise. We're all going to disappear from the CBRC and the Pivot program and just learn and have a great time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yohei, as well as Charlie. And my name is Denise Cole. I go by she, they, he. And I'm very happy to join you from Labrador this evening. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are all on Indigenous lands, and for each of you, wherever you are, they are Indigenous people who are inherently connected to those lands. For myself, it is the lands of the Innu and the Inuit, and for those who are in Newfoundland, it would be the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk. And for anyone else, if you feel like you want to put it in the chat, the traditional lands that you are gathered on, and that we acknowledge that these lands are stolen lands and that these lands are directly connected to those of us who are Indigenous to Spirit, and that without these lands, we are not here. So with that, I would like to, we're going to jump right into the mix. So that's a little bit about me. I'll also bring it back, but I would like to go around our very, our beautiful circle of Indigenous folk who are going to speak this evening. So I actually, I'm a little of an over planner for anyone who received my, how we're going to organize things this evening, though I did not do it for how we would introduce ourselves. So I'm going to go by the square and kind of go clockwise as best I could if we were together in circle around Sacred Fire today. So Stel, first I will pass it to you just to introduce yourself, please.
Okay, thank you, Denise. Welcome everyone. I am Stel Raven.
I am hoping that the sun works with us this evening because I'm outside. I'm currently out on a camping trip, and I figured it was appropriate for this presentation to just stay out here, but the sun is starting to set, so we'll see how it goes. So I am originally from Labrador, but I currently reside in the territory of the Passamaquoddy, also known as St. Stephen, New Brunswick. And I am of mixed heritage. My father is a Nook from Labrador. My mother is Cree from Manitoba. I always find introductions so interesting. What pieces, what elements? I am a parent of 2 children, of a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. And I have a Master of Social Work and have the great privilege to work in private practice with folks. The majority of folks that I work with are Indigenous and or queer, trans, two-spirit, indigiqueer. And I work through distance. So I work with people and connect with people from across Canada. Yeah, in respect of time, I think that'll be good for now. Thank you.
Nakamik, Stel, and then Jude, I'd like to pass the feather to you, my friend.
Hi, my name is Jude. My pronouns are they, them. I am Migma. I am from the Gipu clan, which would be the Eagle clan. I am also a part settler, I guess. I don't know. I don't like saying that because, like, it just feels gross to me. You can say it about you, it's cool. But I'm just like, oh, it's fine. I don't identify with that culture. No. But I am two-spirit, and I am busy. I am tired. And my hair is high today, closer to the creator, you know. Higher the hair, very anti-bun. I love it. I run multiple groups, hence the busy and the tired. But I feel like those groups also give back to me in so many ways that it would be, you know, impossible to mention them without saying how much they mean to me, which I'm hoping to talk about more later. I don't really know what else to say. I'm really bad at introductions. Thanks, Balalan, or Balalio.
Alale. Very glad to have you here, and I think that's a wonderful introduction. With that, further around our circle, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I use they, them pronouns. I am a two-spirit Mi'kmaq artist here in St. John's, and I spend most of my life and most of my time beading or thinking about beads. I am also doing a doctoral degree in history, but I try to cover that up in just a layer of beads, just more and more, and that's it for me.
Naku, in my circle, Robert, you are very much there, but I will not ask you to introduce yourself, but I want to say thank you very much to yourself and our other interpreter, and when they come on, I'll acknowledge them as well. But the role you play is very important for those who also can come and be present with us. And with that, Riley, I'll pass the feather to you.
Awesome, miigwech. Riley Yesno Indigenous Yamatong First Nation in Tonche, Oshawa, Ontario, Nindunjaba. I had to remember because I just moved to Toronto from St. John's, actually. So I'm so happy to be on a call with people who are in Newfoundland and Labrador because I miss it so much already. And it's very lovely to see all your faces. I use she, her pronouns. I'm trying to think. I'm Anishinaabe, identify as cisgendered and queer. I am working on a PhD in political science right now at the University of Toronto. And I'm also a writer and researcher. And I'm so thankful to be here, especially, I don't know, Denise, if you would remember that I was at a meeting that you were at also with the Yellowhead Institute back when we were doing the red paper. And Jude, I've met you with 4 R's. And Sarah, I've followed your Instagram for like a million years. And I'm always trying to buy your beadwork. So, so nice to meet you. And Stel, I'm so excited to meet you as well. So, miigwech.
It's wonderful. And yes, I do remember. I'm very humbled and honored to be in a circle with such good energy and to be around other Indigenous folk. This for me is what I tend to miss many times in where I am right now. I am an Inuk Two-Spirit, and my spirit name is Spotted Elk. I work in youth programming, but it's not just my job, it's my responsibility, and I do it whether I'm on the clock or not. I like to say that I'm not an artist, but I bring art into everything I do, and I do this with intergenerational skill sharing and seeing how we make the connections. I recognize that my skill in being Two-Spirit is I can bring unlikely groups of people together, and so I'm very blessed in being able to sit at multiple tables and to do it from very remote places, and just very happy to be here. So I won't get into too much of my story because I'm very interested in and eager to hear from everyone else. So we are going to jump right into it. We have some wonderful questions that we're going to go around the circle a few more times. I will let attendees know we're very glad that you're here. If you have, apparently somebody needed to tell me that they're driving their quad today. If you can hear that in Labrador. But if you have any questions, there is a Q&A portion towards the end of the talk this evening. So feel free to start putting things in there or put your thoughts in the chat. We really want this to be an extended circle. It's kind of, I like doing talking circles where we have the inner circle, which is what you see right now. All of you are a part of the outer circle who are giving support to us who are in the circle. And so your energy, your thoughts, your love is what helps lift us up and really brings us closer with Creator and how our ancestors speak through us. So with that, our first question, and as I let the panelists know, is that we have 5 minutes with a primary person speaking, and then we'll move to others around the circle. But when you see me put my feather up, that's my little reminder of it's time to wrap up, and so we can move along to the next. So our first, we have if you look at the title of this, and it's a big one, right? Refocusing the Spectrum, Indigenous Reflections on Sexuality, Gender, and Health Outside of Colonialism. The title itself, I'm sure we could spend 2 hours taking that apart. We won't, but instead, I'm going to ask the first question, and it's around the theme of intersectionality. And this will go to Sarah first. And it is, what do Indigenous ways of knowing teach us about health, gender, and sexuality?
Well, Olin, thank you. I'm not super comfortable speaking off the cuff, so I've written my answer down here. So I will be reading off of it, but hopefully I won't be gazing too far into the middle distance that you can't pick up what I'm putting down. So in answer to your question, I think the healthiest thing that I have taken from understanding gender through an Indigenous lens is that who we are as people is both normal and exceptional. The notion that gender is binary is colonial, as is compulsory heterosexuality. These ideas are rooted in colonial understandings that tie gender to sex and which denote binary heterosexuality as normative and all others as outside of that. So a man is a male, a woman is a female, and anything beyond that framework is pathologized. To me, the designation of two-spiritedness acknowledges and validates the inherent more than oneness of my being. It also points to the role of gender non-conforming people as spiritual intermediaries. Our liminal nature grants us the ability to walk between worlds, both in a very literal spiritual sense and a metaphorical sense. Holding this knowledge, taking it seriously, and honoring it has had the effect of profoundly alleviating much of the gender dysphoria and confusion I have felt in my life. I am meant to be more than one, and I am meant to disrupt. That is the position from which my power is enacted. I can and do make choices about how I present myself and how I want to be received, but at the same time, everything about me is exactly as it should be. It is now well documented that prior to colonization, non-conforming people were accepted amongst many different Indigenous groups. Traditional roles for men and women existed and were fundamental to the ordering of daily life, but it was also understood that there are special people whose lives transcend those roles, and their place in the community was important. Far from marginal, two-spirit people were often revered as seers, magicians, shamans, and medicine keepers. Not every two-spirit person takes a spiritual path, but I believe that the blending of both a man and a woman's traits, or the transcendence of those traits within a single person, are both a reflection of our spiritual power. It gives us the strength and the insight to understand and communicate with the world of spirits in a way which is much more difficult for conforming people to do. Because we are not tied to a traditional role, we have a tendency to ask questions that others would not think of and to find solutions that would not be obvious to others. This, I think, is integral to the question of health and medicine. If we listen to people when they tell us what they know about themselves and about the world around them, we are all empowered. This is why it is so important to respect and honor what we know about our bodies and our spirits, and never to try to subvert this knowledge or assume that we know more than someone else does about who they are. One salient problem that comes to mind is the treatment of transgender people's bodies. Modern medicine now knows that gender-affirming surgeries and hormone replacement therapy both have the power to greatly improve overall health. Yet these processes are difficult to access due to the devaluation of transgender people in society and an overvaluation of traditional roles. Similarly, we know that intruding on the bodies of intersex children can be deeply damaging. I think both of these problems could be addressed if we abandoned colonial hierarchies and expressed a greater respect for the experiences and insights of people who do not fit colonial notions of traditional roles. And that's it. That was my that on that.
That was awesome. It got me thinking about a lot of things. And I know for me, this is going to be the hardest part as a moderator who likes to talk and storytell, because it makes me think right away of, there's so much in that that's just beautiful. I'll open it up to the other panelists. Is there anyone who feels that burning desire to add a thought to that? I see you, Riley. I see you moving there. Would you like to add a thought? We have a minute per, actually, and we have a little more than a minute each to keep going with this question.
Okay, miigwech. I love that. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. As you were talking, I was just thinking about like the lens of like healthcare specifically as we know it in Canada today, right? And like, one of the things that I always find so frustrating that like colonial healthcare has annexed from the system is that in Indigenous communities, and Anishinaabe is the one that I'm most familiar with. So like, I guess I could speak more specifically too, but is that like, our medicine people in Anishinaabe country, like understood that your gender and like your sexual health was so much a part of your overall holistic health, and holistic health being like, the main priority of any healthcare treatment Indigenous people were receiving. And so for so much of Western history and present is that like gender, sex, these are all like hidden things, dirty things, silent things, and how profoundly that is a disservice to not only Indigenous people, but to non-Indigenous people and Indigenous people alike. And I just think about, to go back to the question of what does it teach us, is that that's bad. That would be quite wrong.
Awesome. Thank you, Riley. Stel or Jude, anyone would you like to add in? All right, Jude.
I just wanted to add probably a little bit of a downer thought, but because we're talking about medical stuff and trans stuff, I really think that as Two-Spirit people, one of the things that we should talk about joining forces with the queer community overall on right now is the legalization of conversion therapy in Canada. I grew up in the Catholic Church and I experienced a lot of violence from that constantly throughout my life and well into like my university years and my young adult life. And I think that Indigenous people in general face a lot of oppression and a lot of abuse from the church. And I think if it's one thing that we can relate to is that those that should never ever be able to happen to a child or a youth. Yeah, I don't know why, but that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about the fact that, you know, when Sarah was like, yeah, we should go back before, you know, like the colonial ways. Like, I know that's not what you said, but that's the activist me was like, yeah, let's do it and let's ban conversion therapy. So,
yeah, no, and it's, I'm a big believer that whatever comes, that's what's meant to come. And so we speak our truth that way. That is one of the things I truly believe as Indigenous and as Two-Spirit. That's how the ancestors speak through. We do have a message to bring that tends to have not been heard for a long time. And so again, these opportunities are for us to do exactly that. Stel, would you like to add in a final thought there on that question?
Yeah, I guess the thing that keeps coming to my mind is a kind of a combination of what you said, Sarah, and then what you said, Riley, of that, you know, sexuality and gender kind of being something that's dirty, something that's not talked about. And I think one of the things that we need to continue to advocate for, as well as we do start to have a little bit more, and I say a little bit, more conversations about sexuality and gender within the health fields, is that we're still operating through this very narrow lens of what gender and sexuality are. So we can talk about it in some context in a very, I was going to say straight and narrow, which is maybe an ironic sense of choice of words to use, but we talk about it in such a small framework. And that's something that we all, I forgot to mention in my introduction that I'm also a Two-Spirit, queer and trans person. So, and as a health provider and as somebody who navigates the health system, having to constantly negotiate what pieces will I bring? Like, will I bring forward that I am queer? Yes. Will I bring forward more experiences of my sexuality that have a direct impact on my health and my wellness? Well, that's always an assessment based on who it is that I'm meeting with and what that safety is, and all of those pieces expanding.
Absolutely. And I will mention if knowing that the kids are around and that, tell them to stay off the Wi-Fi because your Wi-Fi started to break up a little bit on me there. So that's usually what I do in my space. I go, who's on the Wi-Fi? No, and that was all perfect. And I know, and I'm going to add my own little piece here as well, because I find I am more and more being asked to do things with health authorities and with government departments. And it's become this, we're the knowledge holders and they want our knowledge. What I always come back to is that regardless of what knowledge we bring, and sometimes it is exhausting to bring so much all the time, to be teaching all the time, to know that the power of authority is not with us, that at the end of all of our teaching and sharing, they are still authorities. And so the decisions that get made sometimes do not reflect the knowledge that's been provided. And I think of that intersectionality. And I always say, like, when I go into any space, and especially if I go in for my health, that you are getting different components of me. Two-Spirit is one of them. Indigenous is one of them. But there's all of these other intersections that unless you look at all of that, then you're not really doing my overall health justice. So that we bring our way of knowing, they still have their way of controlling. So I think we need to be aware and be honest about those conversations as well. So there was no way I couldn't get my 2 cents worth in on that one. Next, we're going to jump into the question. Riley is going to take the lead on this one. How does your experience as an Indigenous person intersect with your gender and sexuality?
Yeah, it's just all loaded questions, each of the ones. So big, right? Because like my identity as an Indigenous person and my gender and sexual identity is like touches every part of my life. And so, but talking about that intersection specifically, I see it all the time. It's something that I'm really acutely tuned into because my partner, who identifies as non-binary and a lesbian, is non-Indigenous. And so I see how that extra, facet of my identity, like where that brings differences for us specifically. So like, my partner will talk about all the time, like about how they grew up and they were watching the L Word and all these queer icons that they had. And for me, like, that was just not relatable. Like growing up on the res, I was like, we had the Weather Network. Like I wasn't watching these things. So like there was that aspect of just like being culturally non-connected, but also like even if I had, say, watched the L Word, there's no Indigenous femmes, there's no Indigenous gay people on that show or in any of queer media really up until like maybe this year. And in recent years. And so I remember like the first time I saw a queer Indigenous femme person in the media or in anywhere really was Serene Fox or something when I was like 18 or 19 years old on Twitter. And I was like, oh my God, And so it made me feel like those experiences and that intersection of identity makes me feel oftentimes really distant from a lot of the, hetero settler, or not hetero, but the settler queer community. And most at home when I'm with Northern Indigenous people and people especially that, are from the res. It's like the most fundamental part that I end up coming back to, even like, more profoundly if those people also are queer. And I have been an urban Indigenous person now, or living in an urban context for many years. And there's really beautiful facets of urban Indigenous queer life. But the North is home. And I also then notice the differences between the two. So like something like Two-Spirit is something that everybody at home was like, oh, that's a city native thing. Like we don't use that language up there. And I don't know if anybody has read Marie Lang's new book or seen it. If you haven't, it's like, I really recommend it. It's called Reframing Two-Spirit. And it was what they did their doctoral thesis on. And they're interviewing these youth where they talk about what Two-Spirit and what queerness, Indigenous queerness means to them. And so some of the folks that are coming from the North also reiterate this same thing. But one line from the book that I really like and really resonates with me in terms of this question is that, I don't know how to define my sexuality. I don't know how this like matters, but all I know is no matter what it is that I know I would have been respected in a pre-colonial context, right? And so I appreciate the term Two-Spirit as a term to politically organize around. But the mere fact that there, would have been nothing progressive or radical about my existence in a decolonial Anishinaabe context is very important to me. And that's something that also reminds me about our conversations about queerness outside of Indigenous spaces generally, which is that like, we think it's really progressive when we're making moves like legalizing gay marriage or, having like all of these different types of acceptance. But what, we're actually doing is like reaching back and borrowing from like traditions and centuries old way of already doing things. It's not progressive really in my mind. And so that's like my kind of thoughts and feelings around Two-Spirit about what the North informs. But something I'm sitting on right now that I'll also share in case like it percolates things for other people is that I don't want to like reiterate this like notion or this trope that, Two-Spirit people or queer Indigenous people have to be these inherently sacred, special, like shaman folks, like, but my friend Hannah, who's another queer Indigenous person, told me that they received the teaching that, a lot of people who are queer and who are Native, they find are spiritual people or they're disruptors or, they're people who always got something to say. And it's, I think also by the very virtue of like to be queer and to be Indigenous is like a lot of self-work that you do. It's a lot of, always thinking, it's a lot of hypervigilance. And so you've got a lot of things to bring to the table. And they wonder that if in part, the reason why there are so many more queer Indigenous youth, especially is that, you know, we need our communities to heal from this colonization right now. And so this is like where our place comes in, is to do that disrupting, is to do bringing things back. And I thought that was just like a really beautiful thing that I'm thinking about these days as well, about like, what does that role look like in community in the context of a colonial community more broadly? Sorry, there was a lot of words at the end there. I'm like out of breath. Thank you, Miigwech.
Your internal clock is perfect. And I grew up on CBC as well, right? So it was like, I always think of the female officer on North of 60. I was convinced like she needed to, like, you know, I needed to meet her. So do we have someone else who would like to jump in and add some more to that conversation? Sarah, I see a nod. And then Jude, you want to go first? Hop in.
I just wanted to say, Riley, how dare you tell our secrets? Don't tell them that we're not sacred. Like we're all, like all of us, 100%. Don't listen to her. We're all sacred, and therefore you must prioritize us in your circles. No, seriously though, I don't know, but like it needs to be said, like I'm a very spiritual person. I practice a lot of sacred and spiritual stuff, things that have been passed down to me and things that are really, really important to me. But if it wasn't for that like shiny, like, ooh, look how sacred, look how cool, look how like spiritual they are, especially 10 years ago in St. John's, I would have never been invited to anything. And that's really sad, but like in reality, it's like, you know, and then I show up and I'm like, surprise, I'm actually going to talk about capitalism. But like, you know, like, yeah.
I love that. I do see as well, like how it makes me think of us sitting with a mentor of mine who's a two-spirit mentor, who actually that was how I was introduced in. And I said, well, I'm Inuk. I don't know how I fit in this. I've always heard two-spirit as being First Nations, and they come and sit and learn. And yeah, I know, and it's what he had said, is when we find our own language to put words to that, that's when we start to find the other piece of the puzzle for ourselves. Stel, Sarah, would you like to?
I'm sacred, just so that everybody knows, so we're all on the same page. No, I love that. Yeah, I had a thought and then I immediately lost it. I think it really resonated with me, Riley, what you said about basically being like the double burden of being Indigenous and a queer person, and just being like so tired all the time of like bearing this weight of being that. And I think I like forget it a lot of the time, that like that is a big contributor to why I am like chronically exhausted and feel out of place all the time. But yeah, that resonated with me a lot.
Yeah, what you just said resonated as well. I'm glad to know I'm not alone in that. Sometimes it can get very isolating as well, trying to carry these weights. Stel?
Yeah, similarly, just that there's so many pieces to hold. And it's funny that this is what was brought up, because I had an experience just not that long ago where I was doing something very neutral, like brushing my teeth and just looking in the mirror and kind of reflecting and thinking, all of these labels that I hold or carry, maybe identify with, I'm like, but am I anything? Like, let's just take trans, for instance. That's a label that or an identity that I hold, that I use in introductions that other people place on me. But I'm like, I'm not really trans, but I am. But there's this disconnect, not a disconnect in a like a dissociative way. It's just like, I am just me, but the world tells me that this is something really unique or really like sacred in this, like beyond the way that, you know, all beings are sacred in our world, but that it's this other thing. And I'm like, well, but is it? Like, I'm just here living my life, but it's these other things that go on that go, oh, well, this then is attached to this and this and this and these other pieces. And sometimes I just need to take those moments and step back from that and go, oh, yeah, but at the end of the day, this is just who I am and how I operate. And really, you know, as we're talking about these pieces and we're talking about systems and communities, what I think we ultimately need is to come back to a place where, like it's already been mentioned, that we would just be members in the community and we would just be who we are without this additional emphasis on, which, you know, not to take away from the fact that yes, we do need to have more focus put on places right now, but it's coming, and I'm seeing the impacts of that within our community. We're all seeing the impacts and feeling the impacts of that within our communities.
Maybe we lost Denise. Maybe she'll be back in a sec.
Yeah. Can you all hear me? It's funny because I hit myself, so I can't see myself. So I won't show myself. I think
we can hear.
Perfect. I need to be let in. Charlie, can you? Perfect. So Denise is okay. Cool.
All right. So the beauty of Labrador, our power just went out. But I found a way. So I'm on my phone. I can't really see everybody, but we will do this. So I know that when I left that Stel was speaking, I believe that puts us into the third question. Can someone let me know I'm on the right track? Because I know I kind of dropped off there.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So our third question, and Charlie, what I will ask, because I was putting the questions in for everyone to see into the chat. So if you could do that on my behalf, please, or you'll...
I 100% can. I was just about to do that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So our next question, and Jude is going to take the lead on this one, and it's: how does your family, kin, or community inform your understanding of health, gender, and sexuality? Another big question. Jude, if you could get us going.
Okay, so I had a lot of thoughts on this question, obviously, again, with a very loaded question. No, they're good because I'm probably going to use them for the camp that I'm running this week. I've been doing a lot of thinking into identity and community and what I give, especially around the topics of like burnout. I think as a two-spirit person, I've never met a two-spirit person that isn't doing 10 million jobs. Like most of that is like volunteer work. And I'm like, you know, hey, you tired? And they're like, yeah, like we're tired because like we're oppressed, but we're also tired because like all of us, we all give to the community in big ways. I think for me, the community also, though, like I receive so much in return. And when I talk about the community in St. John's, what I'm really talking about is the majority like queer community, not necessarily just the two-spirit community. The two-spirit community I see more as family. There's so very few of us here. I think there's a lot of us really, but there's so very few of us here that like identify and organize and come together in those ways that when I think about community, I think about the overall community. So I have gender dysphoria and body dysphoria and an extreme amount of mental illness. I'm also chronically ill and disabled. I'm usually like quite sick and pain most of the time. So when I ask for things from the community in return, it's always instantly received. And I have never seen that in any community other than the community that I grew up in. So it's, to me, the St. John's queer community feels very much like an Indigenous community. It seems very rural, and although it has its problems, I mean, like, I haven't experienced chest, well, I do experience chest dysphoria, but not this bad in quite some time. And I realized I didn't have a binder that fit anymore because I've gained quite a bit of weight over the last 2 years. And I instantly put it out that I needed a binder. And within 2 days, someone had found me a program, connected me to that person. And then I had already received a yes, it's here, you can come pick it up. And that to me is incredible. And it's grown, those kinds of support and the way that we hold each other has grown so much over the last decade that it's really like there's no way to measure it. It's just, you know, back then a binder was like something that you would pay $80 for on a friend's credit card and then get it sent to their parents' house so that nobody knew, and, you know, like then hold on to it for 5 years and have this like raggedy worn out. And now there's programs and you can just ask and they can send it to you. And I think something as simple as that, that's also so life-saving for someone's mental health is incredible. And it's not just that, it's it's absolutely everything. It's, hey, I have this idea for this project I'd like to do, and I'm instantly hit with a wave of people who are like, yeah, how can I help you put that off? Like, what would you like to do? It's always taken very positively, and I really love that about this community. Yeah, wow. I don't really know what else to say. I can't see Denise. I don't see the feather, and I do have ADHD, so I'm not gonna know when my 5 minutes is up. Sorry, you have to tell me.
You're doing great on time there, probably with 30 seconds or so, my friend.
Perfect. Yeah, I love this community. It's rough sometimes. We don't always get on. We're kind of like cousins, you know. Like sometimes sometimes you just want to fight. No, but it always works out in the end. Like I don't know if that's corny, but like it always seems to work out in the end. Yeah.
Not gonna make, yeah, I do, and certainly do feel that there's definitely a sense of like the cousins. I love that reference. So we're all like cousins in this. Now I'm of course struggling with seeing other presenters or other panelists, but I am sort of scrolling through on my phone. Do we have someone who'd like to join into this conversation about you know, how does family, kin, or community inform your understanding of health, gender, and sexuality? I'm looking around.
There is one additional thing that I want to add to this, because one of the questions that's presented to me often is the question of, oh, but isn't there a lot of transphobia and homophobia within Indigenous community? And so I really want to address that head on and say that if that is something that you're contemplating, that it's essential that you contemplate that through the lens of colonialism. And oftentimes that question is presented in a way as to say, like, almost that this is a part of our life as Indigenous people, and within it's like a natural inherent part of Indigenous communities. And it is a part of many Indigenous people's lived experiences, but it's not a part of who we are. It is something that has been given, that has been oppressed onto us. And so that's, I just think, something that's really important to acknowledge within our communities and within our families, that when there are experiences of homophobia, transphobia, and when we're just think about our experiences with sexuality in general, that colonialism, we cannot separate those two things.
Thank you, Stel. I appreciate adding that into there. It's absolutely key as well. I'm looking now at Riley or Sarah. Is there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I love this question. I think it's really beautiful talking any chance you get to talk about kin and community. And I think like mostly when I think about it, I always think about like, right, like as the most essential fundamental thing, because what is an identity without anybody to share it with, right? Like without elders to learn from, without youth to come up to give it to next, without people who have a shared experience as you, like then it's nothing, right? And so it's something that I really sit with, and I think about the times when in my life when I didn't quite understand my gender or sexuality yet, but it was super like isolating, right? And to be in the North and by myself and to have no people talking to. And like, that is like the time where I'm like, I didn't become queer till I was like 20. It's like where it comes in my mind, right? Because there's no community and there was no, like, I hadn't built those support systems yet. And so I think that, yeah, it's impossible to talk, like I was, but you know, it was impossible to talk about queerness or indigeneity without community and family.
Absolutely. And Sarah?
I'm gonna be the sacred two-spirit person again here for a second and tell you all about a dream I had. So this was something that was actually like very like formative for me and how I think about like my role in our community and like what other people, and when I say community, I keep like thinking of the queer activist group chat that Jude knows about, but like just in general. So I had this dream basically that I was in, I don't know what century, but it was the pre-colonial period, and I was in this village. And I don't know who I was or where I was supposed to be. I just know that I was me, a Mi'kmaq person in the past. And I was sitting on the step of one of the homes. And I was trying to do magic. I was trying really, really hard to do magic. And I didn't know how to do it. And I had a thought go through my head that I'll go inside and I'll ask an elder for help and they'll help me to do it. And I suddenly realized that there was no one in there because all of the elders were gone and there was no one left to teach me. And my dream basically just ended there, I guess. And that was really powerful for me because I think it spoke to how I feel often, like in my day-to-day life, that I'm kind of like trying to reach and grab at something that feels like it's not really there. But it's that is made easier when you have people around you who are experiencing something similar and you feel like you can collect that knowledge together and you can do things together with people who are actually like within your sphere, who can understand you and like actually help you with those things.
Yeah, completely. And just to add, we get into the next question. Like I think of as well, and resonating with what all of you are saying, this idea of what colonialism brought into my family. And so my understandings growing up of my health and my gender and my sexuality was that they didn't match, like that there was something wrong with me, like fundamentally something wrong with me. And growing through most of my life thinking that, you know, what visits like were to the clinic where it was questions about could I be pregnant, when there was never a question about do you feel like you're, you know, in the right body. Like I needed, you know, having that messaging of I wasn't enough, I wasn't girl enough, but I wasn't a guy either. Like, so it was my understandings then of all of my gender, and then into my sexuality, the expectation of what I was supposed to become, like the damage and trauma that created, but then to find Indigenous queer community and to feel like I was at home, like to feel like I found my people, like to feel that sense of starting to heal and forgive and grow and flourish. Like, because that's what happened when that door got open for me. I flourished. All of a sudden there was the space I needed. The blood memory kicked in. And then it was like that pre-colonial memory of, yeah, there's something very unique and special here that someone tried to take away from me, but I'm reclaiming it and bringing it back. And with that, so we're going to move into our fourth question. Now we're moving into the theme of health, but I know we have been talking about health for sure, but moving away from that intersectionality. And the question is, what might the healthcare system look like, or how might it look differently if it were constructed with an Indigenous worldview, lens, or perspective? And Stel is going to get us started for this one.
Thank you. Oh, this is a giant question. They're all giant questions. I know we've all said that. So I'm going to try to keep it to the 5 minutes, but I've made a few specific points. First, the thing that I think about most when we think about our healthcare system is how structured it is in hierarchy. And in order to get into that hierarchy, you must come up through academic settings. And these academic settings are so racist and so homophobic and transphobic. And when we navigate the academic system as an Indigenous person, as an Indigenous queer person, as an Indigenous queer and trans person, all of these things come up, and just navigating it is so incredibly difficult. So I think we would have to step back, and I think we need to, and we really need to push for academic settings to shift and to change. And that's a really, really big thing. It is happening, but it's hard and it's exhausting by the nature of the fact that when you're in that setting is when you have the most power to get in there and disrupt things. But it means you're also trying to succeed in that system so you can go on and get the credentials that you're seeking. And so the academic system needs to shift and shake a lot, and we need to move away from this, oh, well, we're going to have one two-spirit person come into this, let's say it's a counseling course, and give one hour presentation so we can check off this box and say, yeah, here we have now indigenized or decolonized this course, which are words that are being thrown out in academia so much right now of indigenizing and decolonizing. But those words are being used in ways that are not in the way that they're intended to be. So that's one piece, I think, is setting that out. The second piece that I push for and advocate for all the time, and using the colonial term, would be using an informed consent model. And I think it is absolutely essential. We cannot operate within a healthcare system as healthcare providers or as anybody who is within that system can. I think we could look at everyone's, quote unquote, code of ethics and things, and there's no way you can practice ethically if you're not using the informed consent model. And I could give so many more details on the specifics of that, but ultimately I think the informed consent model means that we come down, and it's already been mentioned by so many of the other panelists here, is that our voices, as we are somebody who is seeking a service of some sort, that our voices are what are heard the most, and that there is an awareness and an honoring of the fact that we know our bodies, we know our communities, that we have these other connections, and that we don't need assessments, we don't need diagnosis. What we need are services, and those services need to be provided through an informed consent model. I forgot to check the time when I started speaking, but I'm going to go ahead with these last two pieces. The other piece is that the whole healthcare system needs to shift to be trauma informed, and I really hesitate to use the words trauma informed because of the way that that language is being used right now, again, similar to the way that decolonizing and indigenizing is being used. So what I mean when I say it's trauma informed is not that agencies or girls take one course that teaches them about what trauma is and the impacts that that has on somebody, and now they consider themselves trauma informed, because that actually pathologizes us even further. What needs to happen is being trauma informed there needs to be this understanding that trauma is synonymous with colonialism, so that it is not that we are people who are coming as sick beings, that trauma has made us ill. It's that we are coming to the table all having experienced colonialism, meaning we have all navigated trauma. And trauma, we don't need a language of post-traumatic stress disorder. What we need is a language of trauma responses. And we all come to the table with our own trauma responses. And those are actually strengths and resiliences. And they need to be honored as such instead of pathologized and criminalized and shut away and medicated and all those things. There is a place for medication, absolutely. That's not what I'm saying, but that's oftentimes at some points medicines can be used in a very oppressive way. So there's that piece. And the final piece, when I think about healthcare systems and what that would look like if it was constructed through an Indigenous worldview or lens, is we would not be put in situations where it's this either or, where we're walking into a place and we have to choose, are we coming to this as an Indigenous person, or is that something like, as are the pieces of our indigeneity, are there pieces that we won't talk about? Will we not talk about the dream that we had last night, even though we know this is directly impacting, it's telling us something about our health or our wellness, or it has a direct impact on us? We wouldn't have to make those choices of, do we bring that to the table or not? That we would be able to have all of the worlds of our elders would be allowed to be a part of our health, even as we're accessing Western health, and there would be holistic health, like real, truly honest to goodness health care services that would incorporate elders and communities and youth and all of the elements of being and existence, including spirituality. Thanks. That's everything.
That was an incredible amount of important information compacted in a short amount of time for such an important question. I appreciate how you pull that all in together. I'll look to my other panelists. Would someone like to add something now to that? And just unmute, and I can't really see y'all.
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, that was so good. It's so good. And I love what you brought in about what's it called, like decolonization and indigenization being like such buzzwords in like really, you know, like everywhere, like in academia and politics and all of these different places. And what I think is so funny when we're talking about a system like Canadian healthcare is that, like, when you throw the word decolonization, it's so pointless because you can't decolonize a colonial system. Is like the fundamental, like, you know, blockage that I think like a lot of people have with like ends up being like a really reformist kind of type of view. And like, I think there's a lot of elements of our healthcare system that cannot be reformed, that like need to be abolished and built something anew. I just think it's for Indigenous people and Indigenous queer people specifically, like healthcare and healthcare services have been just such a profound site of violence for so many times. Like, Canadians don't realize how much of the medicine we have, the medical care that we have, is because of, like, you know, testing done on our communities for years and years, and experimentation and just like brutal violence at the hands of healthcare. And so like that's something that can't be reformed, right? Like that is like something that needs to be reborn in a different way. And I think that there are a lot of healthcare professionals and people in the fields like sort of leading that conversation, like you, Stel, that I'm really grateful for. So, miigwech.
Thank you, Riley. Sarah or Jude, would you like to join in there?
Yeah, so I was just thinking about the time that I was invited into the med school here to talk to med school students, and it was arranged by an Indigenous Two-Spirit person who was in the med school at the time. It was totally optional, and we were in there for, I think, maybe 2 hours. And I went in prepared. I was like, so obviously they have their grounds covered, right? Like they have their trans covered, they have their queer covered. And I can just come in here and we can just, this is me and another Two-Spirit person, and we could just jump in and do Two-Spirit stuff, right? No. It was like, I gotta do all this other stuff before we even touch on this. And this is optional. And this is the only time that any of this class of God knows how many people have access to learning about Two-Spirit people. It blew me away, and it was a good time, and the people that did show up were lovely, but it just left me thinking with like, this isn't enough for even the people that showed up, never mind the people that didn't show up. And just like the idea of like the fact that it is statistically known that people see trans people as being able to, or they see trans people as having mental health issues. And then of course, if you have mental health issues, they don't listen to you and they don't validate your pain. And then they see Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women and Indigenous trans femme people, as experiencing less pain than white women and being able to sustain. And I'm like, that is a very dangerous combination. And it certainly hasn't worked out well in my favor. Or in the case of the youth that was doing the talk with me at the time. And that's all I'm thinking about now is like, you know, the idea that like it's not enough. It's not nearly enough. If people think that they've done enough research and training, that they can go out and provide trauma-informed care for Two-Spirit people, I can promise you haven't. We haven't done enough research on ourselves. Like keep going, like inhale everything that you can.
Absolutely, very important points as well. Sarah, would you like to add in?
Yeah, there's so much to this conversation, and like my brain is going in a million different directions and keeps coming back to trauma-informed care. And like, I think informed about trauma is a good way to put that as well. Yeah, thinking about this classroom environment, Jude, that you entered into with this expectation that like, surely these people must know what a transgender person is, and they absolutely don't, is like really disheartening. Yeah, there needs to be like a fundamental change in like the medical system, the education system, because like what is qualifying as a medical education and the degree of power and authority that a person who goes through medical school gets, and their ability to like wield it over people while simultaneously having zero cultural knowledge, holding deeply racist ideas, deeply sexist ideas, and just with absolutely like no ability to understand where a person is coming from. It's overwhelming. I'm like, my wheels are turning, but I don't know the answer to, other than like complete overhaul, rip it out, do it over. I don't know what else to do because it's profound.
Yeah, and I completely agree with all of that. And what always comes back for me within our, I mean, not just our healthcare system, all colonial systems that we're trying to navigate within, is this, we are optional. Like our ways of doing and knowing, the knowledge we bring, the what we say would work best for us, or when we have people within our community who are advocating and working with us, what they say and suggest is always optional. At the end of the day, there continues to be these authorities who say, well, while we appreciate it, I can't, even though I have a great working relationship and many times with my health authority, so many times in real life circumstances, it's easy to sit around the tables and talk about how we want to make things better. And we come up with strategic plans, and we come up with this and we come up with that. But when the tires hit the pavement is when I'm sitting in there with a family member who needs help, who needs to be heard. And we know what's best within our own community or within our own family. But at the end of the day, we don't fit the colonial check boxes that allow us to actually have autonomy to make decisions. And so that for me is where it always ends with almost every system. And I try to keep faith because we have to keep working within them. I tend to go back and forth from how do we work and build together, and then how do we just burn the village to the ground and restart? I don't know. I go, my two spirits, my fire and water, go back and forth between those, trying to keep in balance and knowing that I have to trust, I have to trust Creator and the ancestors that we're on the right path. Some days is harder than others. Oh, Nakamik, this is such a good conversation. I'm looking at my own time and more questions and thinking, like, let's just spend the night, or at least until my phone dies from the battery running out. So we're going to take another swing into a different theme of art and activism. And this rounds up our last two questions. And this is going to kind of be like our quick go around the fire, right? We're going to keep going around the circle here. And this time everybody gets about 2.5 minutes each to add into our first question, which is, how have your experiences as an Indigenous person impacted your art or activism? And we're going to start with Sarah.
Okay, you probably had that written down on the paper that I didn't read because I have ADHD. Yeah, so how does my art influence? I think it's probably easiest. I mean, I guess they're both tied together, but basically, I have been an artist basically my entire life. Like, I've drawn since I was 9 or 10 years old. I drew all through my teens. But as a lot of people do, I ended up giving it up in like my late teens, and always regretted it. And I always considered myself like an artistic person, but I was one of those people who was like, oh, gee, I wish I had never stopped drawing because now I suck forever. But I picked up beading as a way to reconnect with my heritage, basically with my father's side of the family. And that was so important to me. It was so important for me to have something that was cultural, tangible in my hands, that was a contribution that I could make and that nobody could take away from me, that overrode all my other feelings of like insecurity about my abilities and my like fear about starting again. And now it's something that's just like, obviously I still have those feelings, I think, as everybody does. But yeah, it was something that was, that cultural reconnection for me was such a powerful drive, and like continues to be, that it thankfully overrides a lot of my other insecurities about being an artist.
Awesome. You could like still had a full minute left, so I was going to let you keep going there. We're going to move over to Riley. Riley's going to share with us next, and then we have Jude and Stel to let other folks know to be ready.
Cool. So how have your experience as an Indigenous person impacted in so many ways? I'm thinking the number one thing is like being, my relationships to my community are like the most important thing to me in my life. And it's always what any action I do, anything I say is filtered through, is like, is this something that I'm about to do that is in line with good relations and with accountability, which is something that, in the field of activism is not necessarily like, you know, the driving factor. Like there's a lot of ego in many of these spaces. There's a lot of like, you know, doing this for resume padding or X, Y, and Z. And like, I have found that Indigenous circles for, you know, not obviously universally, but in a huge way that like our relationship to community makes us really accountable in our work. And I think that that's like something really beautiful and powerful about the work that we do. The other thing that I was thinking about was that if it wasn't for like other Indigenous people who are constantly like doing so many good things, who are in the community out there, always working so hard, like, I don't know that I'd have any hope. I think I would be like just down in the dumps. And I never cry harder than when there's injustice done to our own people, but I also never cheer harder than when we win. And I never laugh harder than, you know, when we're together. And that's like the thing that like keeps the fire going. And I want to end with that, but I also want to go back to the accountability bit, because as I was thinking about it, I was just like, isn't it hilarious? Like that, like Canadian, like really racist trope that they have that like, well, we can't give them money or power because what do we know what they'll do with it? I'm like, have you ever seen inter-community accountability systems? Nobody getting away with anything. Like, you can't do anything without everybody knowing and yelling at you about it. So like, it's just really funny to me. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about for that. Gretch.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Jude, want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how like every mistake I've ever made has been very publicly done, or if not publicly done, easily publicly shared and has followed me. But it's fine. It's a learning experience. Okay, so like if this question is still about art, right? Sorry, also ADHD. Going back. I wish so much that my like hyper focused powers can be put on like specifically cultural art things. As an Indigenous person, I have had access to learning how to make dream catchers ever since I was a child. All kinds of beading, baskets, drum making, anything to do with fur, stone, or bone. I've had access to it, and I just don't want to do it. It doesn't speak to me. It doesn't drive me. I can't seem to focus on it for more than a few minutes. I look at Sarah's beadwork and I'm like, oh, I want to do it. I want to do it, and I can't. It doesn't speak to me. What does speak to me is like really creepy, super emo, like early 2000s, like just like, you know, like if you can hear My Chemical Romance playing in the background, it probably accompanies my art, and I don't know why. And I seem to be stuck there in this like trauma poetry and just like really violent, sad stuff. And you know, like I think that maybe it's just all the trauma, you know, like maybe it's just me trying to tell stories and trying to connect to the community around me in a way that, because most of my art, as much as it's been influenced by the anger and the sadness and the hard times, there's always an aspect where I'm trying to reach out and connect to other people and their pain and their trauma. Yeah, it's it's special, but I gotta say, I used to hate my stuff, all of it, everything I ever done. I would wake up the next day and be like, I hate that show, or I can't believe I read that poem last night. But now I just wake up in the morning and I'm like, wow, you're so cool. Like 13-year-old me would be down at Eastern Edge looking at me being like, wow, good for you, man. Look at that weird, creepy mobile that you made with like cigarette burns and like fish wire. Yeah, I'm thoroughly impressed by me if I can just give myself some self-love, but also every Indigenous person's art that I've ever seen. Sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's not so palatable, but like it's always perfect. always. Like there's always something there that connects to me on a different level.
Awesome. And I do believe there's, I mean, that's the diversity, and we need that. We need all of the different ways that we interconnect. Stel, you want to wrap us up on this one?
Yeah, thanks. This is a hard one for me to think about. And as I was thinking about, I'm like, why is this so hard? And I realized, I guess I just don't know what I only experience my experiences with art and activism as an Indigenous person. I have never had an experience that is not that. So I think that might be why this one, I'm just like, well, I don't know really how to conceptualize or quantify that. And that might be in line with just, recently I've been having more conversations with non-Indigenous friends, and just, I'm the person that often has a hard time reminding myself what one of my resiliencies, and one of the ways that I've just navigated life, is believing everyone is thinking the same thing I am, or that it has the same experiences. So that way, some of the experiences that thankfully not everybody has, I like normalize it for myself in my own head, which is a great gift, but sometimes has its downfalls. So as I've been having some of these conversations with different friends and colleagues and stuff around the table, realizing like, oh, so you don't think this in this way? And they're like, no, what do you mean? And not something that I've even ever questioned. So that's, I don't know, it just felt like something I should share. So, but the thing that did come up when I was thinking about this was, I guess, maybe what my definition of art and activism is. And I think that's directly impacted as an Indigenous person, where I don't see art as this thing that you do with pencil crayons and a book in your lap, or that it is something that you consciously do. I think of art as creativity, as creation. And so that's all of these things. So I find creation places like there. I am surrounded by art right now as I look at the birch tree over here, and the way that the bark, the images that the bark's making, and the light is just as the sun's setting, there's just this beautiful hue that's happening and shifting and changing. It's like, that is art, it's like a surrounding. So even if I'm not actively engaging in what might be, in a non-Indigenous way considered art, I still feel that I am. And the same is true for activism, that activism is, there are the big forms of activism that, might be hitting mainstream news medias and stuff. But I also think of activism as just our existence. I often tell people that just being alive as an Indigenous, queer, and trans person is an act of resistance. And my existence is an act of resistance. And so, yeah, I think the definitions of the word and what we think of it, and how, that's also something we can put in a box. But I think I'm constantly just expanding or not thinking of those things through a box.
Absolutely. And I've come to learn that if I were to ever consider myself within art, it is my activism. That has become my voice, how I've learned. I love to write. That's really where I latch in. I've learned that I can articulate, or I can bring words together in a way that allows something to happen that I was never aware of, that I had that ability to do so before. And that's come through in land protection, right? Like, again, even and it's interesting, like when we talk about some of the framework of questioning, right? Of all of us, and it's not until I'm reading the question out loud that I'm like, so what's called many times in colonial terms as activism is my land, it's my protection. It's my protection of these things. It's protection of the next generations. It's protection of culture. It's protection of land, protection of water. Like, it's about love. It really is about love for me. And that's what always connects me back. our last question, then we're going to get into some Q&A again. I can't see the Q&A that's there, so I'm going to definitely be passing it back over to Charlie and the Pivot team that's there. But our last question before we get into the dialogue with all of our attendees. So again, I hope you're all thinking and have been putting questions in. Who has influenced or inspired your work? And are there any books or artists or activists that you would recommend others to follow? So again, we're going to do about 2.5 minutes each, and we're going to go in the order of Jude, Riley, Stel, and Sarah. So Jude, would you like to get us started?
Sorry, I was not prepared to go first. Repeat the question.
It's who has influenced or inspired your work, and do you have any like books or artists or activists that you'd recommend?
Oh my goodness. Okay, there's so many. You. You inspire me all the time, every day. So does everyone else in our community. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, and I'm not two-spirit per se, but everyone should get a copy of one of these. I can just put it up so you can see what it looks like. It's called Policing Indigenous Movements, Dissent in the Security State by Andrew Crosby and Jeffrey Monahan. This has taught me so much just in the general of like protest safety, what my rights are, all that fun stuff. I don't think you can separate the two, honestly. I think if you're two-spirit, your life is inherently political, and unfortunately that means that you might have interactions with the police, and the police are violent. So yeah, let's see what else I have. Here's a fun one to combat that. So Sophie LaBelle is actually Indigenous as well as being an amazing trans person. She is assigned male, I think is the comic. But I have one of her comic books. This one's called Add Your Own Colors to the Rainbow by Sophie LaBelle, and in here specifically it mentions a two-spirit person and who that is, and it has a beautiful image of, I think, picking berries with their grandmother and just like the passing down of teachings. I think that's really beautiful. I've never seen that in something that is for children or in a coloring book. I love coloring books. And there's so many resources out there and so many great things now. If you want to see yourself in media, like in movies and televisions and stuff, oh my goodness, what is the TV show? Oh no, I've forgotten it. It has to do with girls, and they get stranded on an island. It's a total like teenage like YA show. It's on Prime. Someone help me out. I'll come back to it. I'll try to remember it, but it actually has the two-spirit character on there, and for the first time in my life, and she's also like a little bit more like masculine and non-binary presenting, and I saw it and was like, wow, I could like, especially as a teenager, I could have with that. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that was Abby deciding to interrupt. I wasn't stopping you. Keep going if you had I was more going to tell if anybody knows the show to put it into the chat. You're good, Jude? Okay, sorry about that. Abby has decided it's the 1.5-hour mark. Time for all to stop. I'm going to pass it over to Riley.
Awesome. So influence and inspired my work. So I'm sure many folks probably know Tanya Talaga, journalist with the Globe and Mail. So Tanya, I call her my auntie. So when I was like really young, I had read Seven Fallen Feathers, which is about Thunder Bay, which is where I grew up. And so I sent Tanya a DM on Twitter, and I was like, hi, I'm obsessed with you. And she was like, do you want to go out for dinner? And I was like, yes. And so we've been inseparable ever since. And she's been such a good mentor to me for writing and reading and getting into all these things. And she's just like so lovely. So I can vouch that as incredible as a writer and activist as she is, she's also just a glowing human being. So she's somebody I always say to support. But then also these days, I gain like so much from my trans and Black Indigenous kin, especially. And so I'm thinking of folks like Shanice Steele, who is Anishinaabe and Jamaican, Caribbean, and also queer, and is really incredible. I'm thinking about folks like Jay Simpson and Ariel Twist. And so, yeah, I think like trans and Black Indigenous thinkers are like doing some of the most like incredible, groundbreaking, like future shaping work. So that's where I go. And I also just have to say, I put in the chat, but for everybody watching, I have a bit of a hard stop here at what is 7 o'clock in Eastern time. So that's going to be my last question, but I really enjoyed being here with you all. So miigwech so much.
Oh, I'm not gonna make Riley, and so sad to hear that you're gonna have to leave Honest, but I totally understand, and so glad that you were able to come and share space around the fire with us tonight, and hope that I get a chance to do it again, like, you know, whether it's in person or virtual. There's something when you make those the spirit connections, right, and to keep them going. So we're very grateful that you were able to come and be with us. I'm looking at so Stel, would you like to jump in there now?
Sure. So many folks that have already been mentioned. There's a couple of other folks too. Joshua Whitehead is somebody that the writing is just amazing. Jeremy Dutcher has been also just so powerful. Alicia Elliott, yes, wrote the book Mind Spread Out on the Ground, which is just a beautiful, beautiful creation. And I also, as I was thinking about this question, I really need to honor the amount of people that I feel so incredibly grateful who trust me with their stories, who come to me as a therapist, but you know, our paths are intertwined, and I work, my form of advocacy has shifted a lot as I get more into the work that I do, and I'm able to support a lot of folks who are doing just amazing advocacy stuff and amazing art stuff. And of course, I'm not able to name them, but so much of my inspiration, so much of what keeps me doing what I do is from the paths that I'm allowed to, and I'm honored to walk beside. So much of my inspiration comes from so many folks that I meet in my life that way.
Naku, thank you, Stel. Sarah?
Yeah, I feel like this is the biggest question of all because there are so many people. The first two people who come to my mind to name directly are obviously Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, which is an incredible, it's like autobiographical, scientific, like traditional ecological knowledge informed. It's just an incredible book that you can read 1,000 times. And it is available as an audio book, and it is narrated by the author, which is really awesome because her whole spirit moves through it, and it's really dope. And I'm also thinking about, so I'm going to give you like a cheat. I'm going to give you the cheat code if you want to find like a lot of Native artists on social media. Start with #Native Beadwork on Instagram and enjoy your access to thousands of Native artists from like all over the world. If you want like a starting point, Shauna Davis, who her @ is Striking Stick, is amazing. She's like a Gitson Nizga beater out west, and she's just fantastic. And her account is like full of amazing like just her own political thoughts and like spiritual meanderings and her artwork, and it's awesome and I love it so much. But yeah, hashtag native beadwork. Give it a shot. You will find lots of people.
It's amazing. I have to apologize. My dog is afraid of power outages and the power just came back. So she's just figured out that it was out. So this is what's happening. She's trying to wrap around me, all 70 pounds of her. Oh, I wish that, and this is the hard part of sort of trying to hold a phone while I do this, because I wanted to write this down. So I'm looking forward to being able to see the recording of this, which is happening, and the transcript, to be able to catch these things. I would be amiss if I didn't add some of my own. Winona LaDuke is someone who, like, their work in activism and how they see art and nature is just tremendous. I mean, Stel is a big one for me. Stel, who's a part of this panel, who, you know, when I got the privilege to meet them many years ago, inspired me in the work that we could do here in Labrador, and actually a movement that started. You know, the Safe Alliance was born because of a need, and now we hold, you know, Pride celebrations, and we're doing tremendous work in Labrador to make sure inclusion is happening. There's the Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance that is based out of Nova Scotia, but Duma Young and John Solopoy and the people who brought, you know, me under the wing and opened up this Two-Spirit beautiful, you know, world, and helped me find a home. And to you know, here there's the Labrador Land Protectors and elders. You know, my dearest elder, Jim Learning, who's passed on now, but still walks with me every day. And you know, Jude as well. It's very humbling that you would mention me, but I also see how you are taking those stands on the island, and we do, in whether it's small ways or big ways, or whether it's through art or protection. Like, it resonates, because what we're doing is bringing back that blood memory. We're bringing it back into play, and I can tell you there's youth who are watching us, and that gives me great hope, because if I were to say who inspires me more than anyone, it is the generations below me, and they're the ones who keep teaching me all the time. You know, books wise though, it's I have lots on my shelves that I keep trying to read. The Celestine Prophecy is probably one that just really changed my life into believing about energy. But I can't think of her name, but Manuel is the last name. And then there's people from just the Westoughton and what they've been doing against pipelines. I mean, we could go on, and I'm going to stop, because I recognize that I'm getting myself worked up, and Abby is literally like right here now, so she's joined the conversation. With that, it's been my absolute privilege and honor to be able to share space around the fire tonight with all of you, and I'm very grateful for how much thought and care and time you all put into answering some pretty complex questions, but to do it in a way that I hope that participants feel the same way that I do. And please give your love into the chat, because it does take energy for us to do these things, and to bring our voices forward, and to share in ways like this. So I send you all good energy and light and love for the rest of your evening. And I'm going to pass it back to Charlie and Yoke, and they're going to lead us into a discussion. Nakamik.
Thank you, Denise, so much for everything, like leading this discussion, and all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you to the ASL interpreters. Like I say, every time we have you, you're really making the work we're doing a lot more accessible. And that is a huge thing for Quad. And it's something we're going to keep pushing as much as we can. So if we can get money, we're going to keep on doing it.